You, you're arguing whether or not you live near one another right now? All right, that sounds pretty good. I think I'm good to go, so, all right. All right, no, I think we're all set up. Yep. Nice to meet you. I'm Aaron. So, yep. Well, I think with that, auspicious introduction, so I don't make it to this end of campus all that often. And so a few weeks ago, I gave a presentation about some of the work that I was doing with service learning in the College of Agriculture. And one of your instructors saw that work and asked if I would come and talk to all of you. And so I got almost no instruction beyond that. I didn't really know who we'd be talking to, right? What we'd be really talking about. There was some kind of broad, let's talk about service. That's something I can spend a lot of time talking about. And so it's really what we're going to jump in here to today. And so come on in, no worries. I'm Dr. Aaron Thompson. I'm an associate professor of landscape architecture in the College of Agriculture here at Purdue. And I wonder if my batteries just died. There we go. I think we're good. Right, and so in addition to being an associate professor, I also run Purdue's Center for Community and Environmental Design. And so the Center for Community and Environmental Design has existed here at Purdue since 1976. And it is the outreach arm for landscape architecture. And so I'm in a room full of freshman engineers largely. And so let's keep the seniors. We'll specifically call you out here in a minute and see. But the big question to me is that I figured I'd ask. Do any of you know what landscape architecture is? So here's what I want you to do. I want you to spend a couple of minutes and, partner up with somebody sitting next to you. See if you can't come up with a definition, right? It's perhaps a brand new term you've never heard of before, or maybe you think you know exactly what it is. But I'm going to give you 2 minutes. Let's see what you can come up with. I love that I didn't just immediately see the typing, the chat GPT definition of what is landscape architecture didn't pop up immediately, right? All right, so let's see what we came up with. I know I'm cutting that a little bit shorter than 2 minutes. Who wants to be brave and go for it? Back row. He pointed at you first. That's like dibs, so.
Is it like how a certain landscape is laid out, kind of like a green area, how it's laid out?
All right, so how a green area is laid out or designed. All right, that can get us going. How about somebody else?
Like uber landscaping. Like landscaping is usually on people think of it as like a garden scale, but on large scales, like citywide scales.
All right, so citywide scales, right? We're getting there. How about our senior? What do you think?
So like changing of like a natural environment, maybe to like accommodate highways and stuff, just like the changing of overall like natural landscapes for urban accommodation.
Right. You're getting into the right space, right? And so, urban accommodations, dealing with infrastructure, we work a lot with civil engineers. Let's just get a real quick sense. So a lot of you are freshmen, but you're all engineering majors. So I know the freshmen, you haven't chosen your engineering, right? You're in that application process for applying right now. How many of you are going into civil engineering? Okay, there's a handful of you. You will all work with landscape architects. It's an integrated practice across the United States, or actually globally at this point in time. About environmental engineering. Anybody? All right, much less on that side of things. All right, mechanical. I have to admit I can't quite find the connection between landscape architecture and mechanical, but we're going to talk about service today, so we'll get there. What am I missing? Computer. All right, electrical. Anybody doing nano? Is nano a thing at the undergrad level? Yeah.
If that counts, I'm a senior, but I have a concentration in
There you go. That's perfect, right? Did I forget any of the engineering? Aeronautical engineering. All right, there's a few others, right? All right, who did I forget?
Biomedical engineering.
Biomedical. That I knew it was going to catch up on me at some point. All right, so here's landscape architecture. So this is something that I actually use with my own students. So what everybody thinks we do, right? Design small little green areas, right? Pushing a lawnmower. First time I met President Daniels, I was at a faculty gathering, and he said, well, what field are you in? And I said, landscape architecture. He's like, aren't you guys the ones that mow the grass? And I was like, no, we're not. But there's a perception that definitely exists out there, that jumps into this. And so things that start popping up into this is certainly some landscape architects work at a very small scale. This was more traditional, 75 or 100 years ago, that landscape architects did like people's yards. The reality of it is the profession grew up and moved well past and beyond this. And so things that we start to see now, right, just things that jump out, is that we're much more integrated with the architectural and engineering disciplines within the design world. But people still think we plant trees or push a lawnmower, and that's okay. There's part of the green industry that does that, it's just not us. When I say what I want to do, students here at Purdue in landscape architecture, we actually have studios. They have their own offices in our building, and so from the time that they're freshmen all the way through their 5th year, it's a 5-year program to graduate from Purdue, they have an office space that they basically live in, right? And that studio environment operates 24 hours a day, and they certainly work in that environment. And so, what I actually do is just watching AutoCAD crash. And so something I think many of our disciplines, we can share a love for the software when it doesn't work. So I have to admit, I actually don't mind the comparisons with mowing grass. I actually grew up in a landscaping family. That was my dad's industry. Started my first business at 16, made a lot of money, made enough money doing that kind of work to pay for my education. This was the first project that I worked on. This is called Westside Marina in Dubai. And so this particular project is now home to 200,000 people. It has 70 skyscrapers embedded within the development on it, right? And this was my first touch into landscape architecture. I was kind of on board with you, right? Your answer in the back. Design small little green spaces. You know how many different plants we worked with on this project? It's in Dubai. Only like 3 things will grow in the desert, right? And so most of what we were doing here was the hardscape and building out the city. Right, big shock in scale. And this continues on through the type of work that landscape architects do all over the country. Right, and so landscape architects are involved in many, many different kinds of projects. We're licensed in all 50 states in the United States to practice, very similar to the civil engineering licensure. We actually share a lot of overlap with civil engineers. But we're involved in transportation projects, we're involved in streetscapes, recreation facilities, parks. We do restoration and remediation of brownfield sites. And ultimately, they're landscape architects, and I've been involved in some of this work myself. They're planning new cities all over the globe. Right? And so it's a big, really diverse field. So when you meet a landscape architect, you might meet somebody that is really, really good at one of these things. It's rare that you're going to find somebody who works across all of them. And so it's just some of the background. One of the things that they did ask me to get to kind of share with you today was just a little bit of the story of how I got to where I'm at with service. And so I graduated and went into private practice with firms called Wallace, Roberts & Todd. They are one of the premier environmental design firms in the world. And I was working with them, doing a lot of work in Southeast Louisiana. And so I graduated in 2002 here from Purdue as an undergrad. And I spent the next 4.5 years working in Southeast Louisiana on many different projects, right? This happens to be the project that I finished up about 3 months before the storm hit. So this is a sustainable development. The entire master plan community sets aside 30% of the land for water storage, flood mitigation, all kinds of things were built into this. It was an amazing project. And then Hurricane Katrina came through and devastated that region. The highest point in elevation on the site I'd been working on, I'd spent a year working on this project, highest elevation was 7 feet above sea level. the entire site was flooded out. That had nothing to do with as much damage and destruction as what happened in the city of New Orleans, right? City of New Orleans, and again, I know most of you are freshmen. 2005 was a long time ago. You were probably pretty little at that point, right? Were you even born? Mm-hmm. Okay, all right. But one of the things that nobody ever talks about with New Orleans is that New Orleans, for about the 15 years leading up to Katrina, New Orleans had made major strides in sustainability, major strides in public housing, major strides in removing infrastructure, specifically raised highways through the community to rebuild the community fabric. It was on a trajectory to become, to really realize a better future for itself. Hurricane Katrina hit at the wrong moment in time on the wrong tide, and then mechanical systems started to fail across the city, and the entire city, not the entire city, but large stretches of the city went underwater. The human catastrophe that happened after that was largely due to lots and lots of failures, but people died. Entire neighborhoods are destroyed that are still not rebuilt to this day. And it's not that the city's not trying to do things right, but for those of us that had worked in that city and saw how close they'd come to actually turning their city around from a city that had really, really fallen off in the 1960s and 1970s and turning it around, this was devastating. And my firm was actually the first firm back in after Katrina to help the city try and figure out, where do you go from here? How do we get back? And I will tell you, my firm got fired, right? One of the reasons we got fired is that we were trying to move too fast. There were still displaced people 3 years later, right? People who owned property that had been flooded out that were living in Houston. And I'll tell you, the unfortunate reality of that is that 20 years later, many of those people still live in places like Houston or Louisville or other places. They've never come home, right? And the reason my firm got fired was that we were trying to move forward, but the public wasn't there, right? They didn't have the support of the public. All of the new plans, all of the let's rebuild the city efforts, all came to a crashing halt. This was a big shift for me, right? I'm a designer, right? Working with the public was something that we did in order to get our marching orders and then go off and do our creative thing and build stuff. This is a huge failure. It opened up my eyes that there's a huge gap in the design process for those of us that work on designing cities and addressing environmental challenges. And that comes really back around to the issue of working with people. So, I knew I was off to grad school. I knew I had a little pocket of time that my wife was willing to be supportive of. And I decided to take a year and spend it with AmeriCorps. Anybody know what AmeriCorps is? All right. No one around the room? All right. Who's heard of the Peace Corps? I saw a hand. What's the Peace Corps?
I don't know exactly what it is, but I have my mom's cousin's kid was in Africa for a few years working for.
Right. So that's exactly what it is. Peace Corps takes talented people from the United States and sends them to places where they're needed, right? And so people with ideas that realistically you're going to learn more from the community you get placed in and work with, but the same idea is that we send talent out overseas. And so this was developed by John F. Kennedy's administration back in the 60s. They started sending Peace Corps volunteers all over the globe. I'm not a Peace Corps alum, I'm an AmeriCorps alum. AmeriCorps is a domestic program. Again, what I saw in New Orleans was I saw, devastation of the public housing, the poorer neighborhoods. Low-income housing was completely disrupted in that city by the storm. There were lots of wealthy neighborhoods that were untouched, right? Drew Brees went to the Saints not too long after the storm and lived in a very, very nice neighborhood that didn't get wet during the storm, right?